Have you ever dedicated your entire youth to a company only to be thrown out one day like a worthless nobody? Have you ever trusted a colleague, someone you once considered a friend, only to realize they were the very person who stabbed you in the back? Life isn't always fair. Sometimes the bad guys win. The greedy ones climb higher and the honest people are cast aside without mercy. But that doesn't mean you have to accept the fate they impose on you. Imagine being at the peak of your career, everything under control, your reputation solid, respect earned, and a bright future ahead. But overnight, it all comes crashing down. You're falsely accused, thrown out of the company, your reputation shattered, and suddenly, in the eyes of everyone, you're a failure. No one stands by you. No one believes you. You are completely abandoned. But then you uncover the truth: you were set up. And not just that, the ones pulling the strings behind this dirty game are the very people you trusted the most. So, what will you do? Accept defeat and disappear forever? Or rise up, gather evidence, and turn the tables to make those traitors pay? This is the story of a man betrayed in the very place he dedicated his career to. But instead of falling, he chooses revenge, one that no one ever saw coming. And the ending? The very people who destroyed him will be the ones begging on their knees in despair. The story begins on a fateful morning as I walked into the office, completely unaware that it would be my last day there. TS were valued. But in the end, I was nothing more than a disposable pawn in the power games of the greedy. It all started with a major project, a multimillion-dollar contract where I was appointed as the lead manager. This wasn't just a huge milestone in my career. It was a sign of trust from the executives. I worked tirelessly, obsessing over every detail to ensure everything went smoothly. If successful, this project wouldn't just elevate the company to new heights. It would bring me closer to the position I had always dreamed of. But then, everything collapsed in the blink of an eye. One morning, as I arrived at the office, I sensed something was off. The hushed whispers, the cautious glances. It was as if everyone knew something I didn't. Soon after, I was summoned to the director's office, where the entire executive board was waiting, along with James, the colleague I had once called a friend. In front of me was a thick stack of documents, glaring red numbers, and a single accusation. You have embezzled a significant amount of company funds. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I was stunned. Embezzlement? Me? The mere thought was laughable. But before I could even open my mouth, James, the very person I had trusted, spoke up. I really didn't want to believe this, but the evidence is clear. Funds have been withdrawn from the project's budget, and you were the only one with access. The system logs show that your ID authorized the transactions. I grabbed the documents, my heart pounding. It was all too perfectly orchestrated. Transactions I had never seen before, my digital signature appearing on them as if I had truly done this. I pleaded for a proper investigation, tried to explain that this had to be a setup, but no one listened. The director's gaze was ice cold. The same people who once praised me now looked at me as if I were a traitor. No chance to defend myself. No real investigation. 3 days later, I was fired. I walked out of the company building under the pitying eyes of some colleagues, and the smug satisfaction of others. But losing my job wasn't the most painful part. It was the betrayal. The realization that the people I had trusted the most had orchestrated my downfall. But there was one thing they didn't know. I wasn't going to let this end so easily. 3 months after being fired, I was like a man lost at sea. No job, no reputation, and no one believed me. I had sent out dozens of job applications, but every single one was rejected the moment they saw my name. It seemed my former company had spread the embezzlement story to ensure I could never recover. I had thought about giving up. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had been naive to believe that justice would simply prevail on its own. But then one day I received an anonymous email. You were set up. Look into James and the project. My heart pounded. Who sent this? Did they have proof? I tried tracing the email, but it was sent from an untraceable, anonymous account. I had no idea who they were. But this was the first glimmer of hope after months of darkness. Step 1. Finding the truth. I reached out to a few former colleagues, the ones I knew I could trust. They were hesitant at first, afraid of getting involved, but then one of them, Linda, the company's former accountant, agreed to help me. Linda told me that after I was fired, James was promoted to project manager. But just a month later, he mysteriously left the company, with a large sum of money deposited into his personal account. A chill ran down my spine. This was no coincidence. I began digging through every document I had managed to keep before leaving the company. That's when I made a shocking discovery. The embezzled money never actually disappeared, it was simply rerouted to another account before being withdrawn. The recipient? A shell company owned by James. This was the proof I needed. I had been framed, And James was the real thief. Step 2. Uncovering an even bigger fraud. I kept digging and soon stumbled upon something even bigger. My former company wasn't just covering for James. They were involved in a massive financial fraud operation. They had been falsifying expenses, inflating revenue, and using shell companies to launder money. Now it all made sense. They didn't just want to blame me to protect James, they needed a scapegoat to cover up their own crimes. Step 3. Planning my revenge. I knew that simply exposing them wouldn't be enough. A large corporation with an army of lawyers would crush me before I even got close. I needed the knockout punch, something they couldn't escape from. I gathered every piece of evidence. Heavy checkmark internal emails discussing the manipulation of financial records. Heavy checkmark bank statements showing the embezzled money was transferred to James. Heavy checkmark documents proving the company had been falsifying financial reports for years. Then I reached out to the tax authorities, Financial Crimes Division, and a few investigative journalists. I wasn't just seeking justice for myself. I was going to bring this entire corrupt empire crashing down. The storm was coming. And this time, I was the one holding the reins. I am no longer the man I was 3 months ago, the one drowning in despair after being betrayed. Now I am the predator, and my prey is my former company and the people who destroyed me. With all the evidence in my hands, I knew I had to strike from multiple angles to ensure that no one could escape. I started executing my plan, step by step, like a well-calculated chess game. The first strike, hitting their weakest point. Their biggest vulnerability? Financial fraud. I submitted a comprehensive dossier of their shady transactions to the tax authorities and Financial Crimes Division. It included proof of their inflated revenue reports, forged contracts with shell companies, and undeniable evidence that James was the real embezzler. But I didn't stop there. I also leaked the story to a top investigative journalist from a major financial news outlet. The results came faster than I had anticipated. Within a week, tax authorities launched an official investigation. The company was hit with an unexpected financial audit, chaos erupted within its walls, and soon, news of the investigation started to spread. The second strike, the public expose. I knew the company would try to contain the situation and silence the media. That's why I had already prepared my next move. With the help of a former colleague, I gained remote access to a live boardroom meeting via the company's internal system. And just as the meeting began, I hijacked their live stream. I played a video from a USB drive containing damning evidence, footage, screenshots, and documents proving Heavy checkmark James manipulated accounting records. Heavy checkmark the CFO authorized illegal transactions. Heavy checkmark the executives knowingly covered up tax fraud. The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. And then, right at the peak of their panic, the police stormed in. The final blow. The empire collapses. The fallout was swift and devastating. Heavy checkmark James was arrested on-site for embezzlement and financial fraud. Heavy checkmark the CEO and CFO were detained for questioning, facing multiple fraud charges. Heavy checkmark the company's stock plummeted. Investors withdrew in panic, and within 2 months, the company officially collapsed. Everyone who had betrayed me was now living in fear and disgrace. James was sentenced to prison. The CFO lost his entire career. The executives were sued by their own shareholders. And as I stood in front of the now abandoned company building, nothing more than a ruin of its former glory, I felt no regret. I had cleared my name. I had made them pay. I was no longer just another fired employee. I was the man who brought down an empire. I once believed that justice only existed in stories, that the strong could trample the weak without ever facing consequences. But as I stood in front of my former company's building, once a hub of power and ambition, I realized that justice is real. Sometimes, it just takes someone determined enough to chase it to the very end. The company's sign had been removed. Bankruptcy notices covered the glass doors. And the very people who had thrown me out were now paying the price. Heavy checkmark James, the one who framed me, was sentenced to years in prison for embezzlement and financial fraud. Heavy checkmark the CFO, who approved the shady transactions, was banned from ever working in the industry again. Asterisk asterisk. Heavy checkmark the executives, who had turned their backs on me without hesitation, were drowning in lawsuits from shareholders and business partners. Asterisk asterisk. They once believed they were untouchable, but now they had nothing left but regret. I could never get back the 15 years I had dedicated to them, but I had reclaimed my honor. No one looked at me with doubt or contempt anymore. I was now the man who exposed the truth, the one who brought down a corrupt empire. Companies that once hesitated to even consider my job applications were now reaching out, eager to have me on their team. But I had already made my decision. I would never let anyone control my fate again. Using the settlement money from my lawsuit, I started my own business, one that belonged entirely to me. No more dirty games. No more betrayals. The day my former company officially declared bankruptcy, I received a text from an unknown number asterisk. You did it. They got what they deserved. I never found out who sent it, but I smiled. Yes, they did. The traitors. The greedy. The ones who thought they could step on others to climb higher. Asterisk asterisk. They all got what was coming to them. Because sometimes revenge isn't about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes, revenge is about making them watch as you rise to the top, while they are buried in the ruins of their own downfall. And that is the justice I won. In the end, I realized that betrayal isn't the end. It's merely the beginning of a greater story. I once thought that losing my job, being falsely accused, and having an entire system turn against me was the worst thing that could happen. But in reality, it was the push I needed to see people's true faces, to understand that I could no longer be just a pawn in someone else's game. Looking back on my journey, I don't see a failure. I see someone who rose from the ashes and became stronger than ever. I no longer hold resentment toward James or the executives who betrayed me. They dug their own graves with their greed and deceit. Their company is now nothing more than a forgotten name. A bitter lesson for anyone who thinks they can toy with others' trust without consequence. While they drown in lawsuits and debt, I am building my own empire. A company founded on fairness and integrity, where no one has to live in fear of betrayal as I once did. Life isn't always fair, but I've learned one thing. When you're pushed into the abyss, you have two choices: let yourself fall or find a way to rise even higher. I chose the latter. And if there's one lesson I want to share with anyone who has ever experienced betrayal, it's this. Never let the villains decide how your story ends. Write your own final chapter. When it was all over, I realized that the world doesn't naturally operate on fairness. The greedy, the deceitful, and the powerful will always find ways to manipulate the system for their own gain. If I had simply sat back and hoped that justice would find me, I'd probably still be drowning in rejection letters and the condescending stares of society. But I didn't wait. I stood up and took back what was mine. Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms or laws. Sometimes it comes from those who refuse to give up and fight until the tide turns. Betrayal taught me a harsh but valuable lesson. Never put your faith in those who only care about their own interests. But more importantly, it taught me that revenge isn't always about hurting someone. It's about rising stronger, succeeding beyond their imagination, and making them witness it in helpless silence. I didn't just clear my name. I proved to the world that I was never someone who could be discarded so easily. I turned pain into fuel, failure into opportunity, and most importantly, I became someone who could never be defeated again. The day I stepped into my own office, the feeling was entirely different. I was no longer a fired employee, no longer a falsely accused man. I was someone who controlled his own destiny. And as I looked out the window, I didn't see the ghosts of the past anymore. I only saw the road ahead, wide open, full of possibilities. And I knew this was only the beginning. I once thought that betrayal and loss would haunt me forever, that I would always be defined by what had happened to me. But as I stepped through the doors of my new office, the company I built with my own hands, I realized that the past no longer had control over me. It was no longer a chain that kept me bound in pain or resentment. Instead, it had become a solid foundation for me to build a better future. The people who once laughed at me have either lost everything or are desperately trying to recover from their own mistakes, but I don't care about them anymore. The only thing that matters now is the road ahead, the one I have carved for myself, free from anyone's manipulation. Perhaps the greatest lesson I've learned isn't about revenge or reclaiming justice, but about growth. I have become stronger, sharper, and wiser about where to place my trust. I am no longer the person who naively believed in empty promises, but I haven't turned into a bitter, cynical man either. I have simply learned that life's challenges don't exist to destroy us, they exist to shape us into stronger versions of ourselves. Now, every morning when I walk into my office, I feel no fear, no anxiety. I no longer have to look over my shoulder, afraid of betrayal. I am free. I am in control of my own life. And I know that anyone who has ever been betrayed, just like me, can rise again. Because in the end, it's not about how many times you fall. It's about how powerfully you rise. And for me, this is not the end of a story. This is only the first chapter of something far greater. Life isn't always fair. There will be times when you are betrayed, treated unfairly, or cast aside despite doing everything right. But what truly matters is how you respond to that injustice. You can choose to fall and let others dictate your fate, or you can stand up, fight, and take back what's yours. Never let anyone else write your story, be the one who holds the pen. If you've ever faced injustice, remember, every action has consequences. The betrayers, the greedy, the ones who step on others to climb higher, ***, they will all face their reckoning one day. Justice may not come immediately, but it always finds a way. And sometimes, you have to be the one to bring it. ####. What do you think about this story? Have you ever experienced an unfair situation and want to share? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more stories of justice, revenge, and life lessons. See you in the next video.